Good evening, Canada. I'm Liam Smith, and this is Canada Tonight, and we are leading tonight with breaking developments from Parliament Hill that will reshape how you understand what's happening at our borders right now. This week, Prime Minister Mark Carney did something unprecedented. He sat down for his first-ever comprehensive interview with the Canadian press since taking office, and what he revealed is a complete picture of Canada's most high-stakes power play in modern history. He spoke from his Parliament Hill office, surrounded by symbols of Canadian pride, a CFL helmet, a football from Edmonton, and Oilers memorabilia. And every single word he spoke matters. Here is what Carney said, and this is critical. He said Donald Trump is a tough, unpredictable negotiator with uncompromising views about exactly what he wants from Canada. He said, and this caught everyone's attention, that Canada will not use its energy or critical minerals as a weapon or bargaining chip against the United States. He said, most of CUSMA will survive the brutal review process ahead, but significant changes are coming. And he delivered a stark warning. Canada's auto sector, the backbone of Ontario's economy, is literally at risk of being dismantled by American tariffs. This interview is not just important for what Carney said out loud. It's critical for what it exposes about Canada's entire negotiating strategy moving forward. A strategy that is measured but uncompromising, direct but diplomatic, and built on something far more powerful than any single card Canada could play. Tonight, Canada Tonight breaks down every critical moment of that interview. The hidden meanings, the calculated moves, and what it all means for Canada's economic survival. Let's dive in. Let's start with what Carney said about Trump directly, because this is the most raw, most candid assessment any Canadian Prime Minister has delivered publicly about the sitting U.S. President in decades, and it's a warning. Carney told the Canadian press this: he's a tough negotiator, he has very strong views about what he wants, and so what's important is to find ways to communicate what Canada wants, what Canada expects, that's respectful, but also direct. Respectful, but direct. That phrase right there is everything. That's Canada's negotiating doctrine. But Carney went further. He said he's learned something critical about how Trump actually operates, something that contradicts decades of diplomatic playbooks. He said there's a dangerous misconception floating around that the best way to handle Trump is to cloak things in diplomatic language, to soften the message, to flatter, to hedge. Carney has concluded that approach is dead wrong. Trump, he said clearly, does not respond to soft power or coded language. Trump prefers being spoken to directly. He demands clarity. He wants to know exactly what the other side wants, stated plainly, without the diplomatic varnish. No games, no theater. This is a seismic insight into how Carney has been operating for the past year, and it explains everything. When Carney sat in the Oval Office and told Trump directly, without equivocation, Canada is not for sale, he was not being confrontational. He was speaking Trump's language, direct, crystal clear, zero ambiguity. When Carney stood in Quebec City and declared, Canada does not exist because of the United States, he was making a foundational statement about Canadian sovereignty in terms that Trump would not just understand, but respect, even if he disagreed with it fundamentally. And when Carney told the Canadian press this week that the United States will not dictate the terms of CUSMA, he was being direct again, not aggressive, not provocative, but unmistakably clear about where Canada's red line is drawn. Carney also made something else explicit that matters enormously. He acknowledged that the world has changed since Trump's first presidency. The ambitions of the U.S. president have evolved. They're now all-encompassing. The nature and effectiveness of America's constitutional checks and balances have shifted. The priorities driving Trump's trade war are different now, more aggressive, more unpredictable. This is a sober, unflinching assessment from a leader who is not in denial. Carney is not pretending the relationship is normal. He is not pretending Trump is just another president. He is dealing with reality as it exists right now, exactly as he committed to do at Davos, and that honesty is Canada's actual strength in these negotiations. Now, here's where it gets explosive. The most shocking, most debated moment from Carney's interview came when he made a statement that initially confused analysts, frustrated provincial leaders, and sparked urgent debate across the country. Carney said this: Canada will not use energy or critical minerals as leverage in CUSMA negotiations. That landed like a bombshell. And here's why people were shocked. For months, Natural Resources Minister Tim Hodgson had been publicly stating, repeatedly, clearly, that energy and critical minerals are Canada's strongest negotiating cards, the most valuable chips Canada has to play. Provincial premiers, from Alberta to Saskatchewan, have been talking about Canada's energy resources as essential bargaining tools, and frankly, common sense screams that a nation sitting on vast reserves of oil, natural gas, uranium, and rare earth minerals has something extremely valuable to offer in any negotiation with the United States. So when Carney said Canada will not use energy or critical minerals as leverage, people thought, what? Why would you surrender your strongest hand? But here's what Carney actually said, and this is the crucial distinction. I reject that characterization of its leverage. It's looking at, is it in our mutual interest to trade more? Where is it? And if it's not there, we have other options. Stop. That is not surrender. That is sophisticated power negotiating at the highest level. Carney is not saying Canada's energy and minerals don't matter. He is not saying they have no value. What he is saying is that Canada will not treat them as a weapon to be deployed, withheld as a threat, or used as coercive leverage. Instead, and this is brilliant, Canada will approach energy and critical minerals as potential areas of mutual economic benefit, deeper cooperation, and greater trade flows, if the overall CUSMA deal serves Canada's core interests. And if it doesn't, if the terms are bad for Canada, then Canada walks away and sells those resources to other markets. Why does this reframing matter so much? Because the Trump administration made its own position crystal clear. U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer told visiting Canadian politicians and trade delegations in Washington this exact message. Canada should not attempt to use its energy and natural resources as leverage in CUSMA negotiations. The administration is seeking cooperation with Canada on energy and critical minerals development in ways that would benefit both countries, but not through coercion. By rejecting the leverage framing publicly, by aligning Canada's stated position with Washington's stated preference, Carney just removed a potential flashpoint, a source of dangerous friction in the relationship. But, and this is vital, he gave nothing away. Zero. He explicitly said, Canada has other options. If trading more energy and minerals with the United States is not in Canada's mutual interest, if the deal isn't fair, Canada will pursue those resources through other markets. China wants Canadian uranium. India wants critical minerals. Europe needs energy security. The world is hungry for what Canada has. This is not a threat. This is a statement of fact. And the proof arrived yesterday in Mirabel, Quebec. The timing is not coincidental. The day after Carney delivered his most detailed, most revealing interview about CUSMA strategy, he stood in Quebec and announced a $19 billion aircraft deal with AirAsia, a Malaysian airline, 150 jets, assembled in Canada, bound for Southeast Asia. This is not random timing. This is a demonstration in real time. Carney's entire negotiating position with Trump rests on a single powerful argument. Canada has options. Canada is not desperate. Canada is not willing to accept any deal at any price because Canada has been systematically building alternatives. Non-U.S. exports are up nearly 25% in recent years. Canada has active trade agreements with 26 countries around the world. Canada has an aerospace industry that is selling aircraft to Asia, not begging for scraps from America. Every deal Canada signs strengthens its CUSMA position. Every barrel of oil flowing to Asia through the Trans Mountain Pipeline reduces American leverage over Canadian energy. Every aircraft assembled in Mirabel for an Asian customer proves that Canadian manufacturing does not depend exclusively on U.S. markets. When Carney said to the Canadian press, Canada has other options if trading more energy and minerals with the U.S. is not in Canada's mutual interest, the AirAsia deal is the hard proof that those options are real. Concrete, functioning, profitable. This is not strategy. This is strategy in action. Carney's prediction about CUSMA's future now, Let's examine what Carney said about what CUSMA will actually look like after the review process, because it's more optimistic than many analysts predicted. Carney said, "I believe most of the trade pact will survive. Much of it will be retained. Some things are going to have to change, but we're looking to make sure they change in a way that's in Canada's interest." This is a measured but decidedly optimistic assessment. Carney is not predicting that CUSMA will survive unchanged. That would be naive. He acknowledges openly that evolution is coming. Changes will happen. But he has genuine confidence that the core architecture of CUSMA, the foundational framework of rules, the tariff reductions, the integrated supply chains that bind North America together, will be preserved. Why is he confident? Several critical reasons. First, Trump negotiated the original CUSMA during his first term. He signed it. He called it, at the time, the greatest trade deal ever made. Now, yes, he's since called it irrelevant and merely transitional, but there's a difference between Trump's public theater and his actual negotiating position. Carney noted clearly that Trump has given no actual indication he wants to walk away from CUSMA entirely or start from scratch. The rhetoric is loud. The actual position is more pragmatic. Second, and this might be more important, the U.S. business community is fighting hard to preserve CUSMA. Why? Because they depend on it. They depend on integrated North American supply chains. During the U.S. government's consultation hearings in Washington, business leader after business leader stood up and warned that abandoning CUSMA would not just hurt Canada, it would be an economic catastrophe for American companies, American workers, and American consumers. Ford, General Motors, Stellantis. These companies have major manufacturing operations in Canada. Their supply chains cross the border constantly. Third, the integrated nature of the North American economy itself creates powerful incentives that neither side can ignore. The auto sector that Carney warned is at risk of being pulled apart by tariffs is also deeply, inescapably American. Those Canadian auto workers build cars for American consumers. Tariffs that devastate Canadian workers also devastate American automakers and American consumers. This mutual dependence, this hidden wiring of the North American relationship that Carney mentioned, creates a floor under the negotiations. Neither side can walk away cleanly without causing serious damage to its own economy. That's the leverage that matters, not threats. Economics. The auto sector warning. This is where it gets urgent. One of the most important, most alarming parts of Carney's interview was his direct warning about Canada's automobile sector. He spoke about Canada's incredibly integrated automobile industry, which he said is being pulled apart by U.S. tariffs. Pulled apart. Those are serious words from a prime minister, and they reflect a dire reality. Ontario's auto sector employs more than 90,000 people. That sector is facing its most difficult moment in decades. Trump's Section 232 tariffs on Canadian automobiles, 25%, have fundamentally disrupted the integrated supply chains that allow Canadian and American factories to work together seamlessly. Here's the economic reality. A single car part that crosses the border 4 times during its production now faces tariffs each time it enters the U.S. The economics of integrated production are being fundamentally altered. Parts that were profitable to move across the border now bleed money. Assembly lines are under pressure. Workers face layoffs. Canada's negotiating position on autos is absolute and non-negotiable. Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland has stated it clearly. Canada does not want a CUSMA renewal that resolves other issues while leaving auto sector tariffs in place. Canada wants the entire package, including complete relief for auto workers, as part of any deal. This is where Carney's philosophy about direct communication with Trump matters most acutely. The auto sector is where Canadian workers feel this trade war in their paychecks. It's where the stakes are not abstract, they're concrete and they're human. It's where Canada's negotiating team needs to be most firm, most resolute about what an acceptable outcome actually looks like. Carney said it directly. Canada will only accept a deal in the best interest of Canada, not just in the short term, but in the medium and long term. For the auto sector, the best interest of Canada means one thing: tariff relief. Full stop. No partial measures. No delays. Relief. the strategy becomes visible. Let's connect Carney's CUSMA strategy to what happened in Mirabel yesterday, because the timing reveals everything. The day after Carney gave his most detailed, most revealing interview about CUSMA negotiations, where he outlined his strategy, his principles, his red lines, he stood in Quebec and announced a $19 billion aircraft deal with a Malaysian airline. 150 jets, made in Canada, assembled in Canada, going to Asia. This is not coincidence. This is demonstration. Carney's entire negotiating position with Trump rests on a single argument, repeated constantly: Canada has options. Canada is not desperate for any deal at any price, because Canada has been systematically building alternatives over the past year. Non-US exports are up nearly 25%. Canada has trade deals with 26 countries. Canada has an aerospace industry that is selling jets to Asia. Every deal Canada signs with a non-American partner strengthens its CUSMA position. Every barrel of oil that goes to Asia through Trans Mountain reduces U.S. leverage over Canadian energy policy. Every jet that Bombardier or Airbus assembles in Mirabel for an Asian customer proves that Canadian manufacturing does not depend exclusively on the American market. When Carney told the Canadian press that Canada has other options if trading more energy and minerals with the U.S. is not in Canada's mutual interest, the AirAsia deal is the concrete proof that those options are real, not hypothetical. Real. This is strategy in action, not threats, not ultimatums, not inflammatory language, just actions, concrete, measurable actions that demonstrate Canada's resilience and Canada's global reach, making the case in the most powerful possible way that Canada negotiates as a country with choices, not as a dependent with none. Reflecting on the leader Canada has right now, before I let you go tonight, I want to reflect on what Carney's interview this week reveals about the kind of leader Canada has in this critical moment. He called Trump a tough negotiator, directly, honestly, without flattery, without venom, without delusion. He said Canada has to communicate what it wants respectfully but directly, not submissively, not aggressively, but clearly. He rejected the leverage framing on energy, not because Canada doesn't have leverage, but because he understands something deeper. The better approach is mutual interest, not coercion. He acknowledged honestly that some parts of CUSMA will have to change. He didn't pretend otherwise. He warned clearly, directly, about the auto sector risk. He didn't sugarcoat it. This is a prime minister who is clear-eyed about the challenge Canada faces, who has no illusions about who he is negotiating with, who has a strategy, not a hope, not a wish, but an actual strategy for achieving an outcome that serves Canada's interests and Canada's workers. And while he is negotiating, he is also building. The AirAsia deal, the Critical Minerals Alliance, the Sovereign Wealth Fund, the $51 billion infrastructure investment, the EU Defense Partnership, the Armenia Minerals Summit. Every single one of these achievements makes Canada stronger. Everyone makes Canada's CUSMA position more credible. Everyone tells Washington and the world that Canada is not waiting to be saved by a trade deal. Canada is building its own future. The July 1st checkpoint is now 55 days away. The negotiations are underway. The stakes have never been higher. But Canada's position is clear, crystal clear. Canada will accept only a deal that is in the best interest of Canada, not just in the short term, but for the long term, for auto workers, for energy workers, for Canadian families, for Canada's future. I'm Liam Smith. This is Canada Tonight. Thank you for watching. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and stay strong, Canada.